Welcome back, everyone, to our second half hour of 12 News at 4. Let's get to our continuing coverage of the Lori Vallow Daybell trial. After hearing closing arguments from both the state and Vallow Daybell, the jury has decided to go home and finish their deliberations tomorrow.
12 News journalist Erica Stapleton has been in the courtroom all day hearing the closing arguments. She's here live in studio with us now. Erica, we thought there'd be a chance that we could get a verdict this afternoon, but it looks like that's not going to happen.
Yeah, Rachel Tram, we thought it would be possible, but realistically, the closing arguments, it took a long time to get to them. And then the state went on for more than 90 minutes in her closing statement. So I think that really pushed everything back this afternoon. And once they got the case just after 3 this afternoon, the jury almost immediately wrote back and told the judge, we want to go home and we will continue this in the morning. So that's what happened within the past hour or so. And you know, the judge said the jury has the opportunity to make their own schedule. So that's expected in this case. But of course, this comes on the heels of closing arguments. Again, I said we started this afternoon, starting with the state. She took, again, more than 90 minutes to lay out very meticulously essentially every piece of evidence that she presented so far over the course of this trial, calling again nearly 20 witnesses, 7 days of testimony. Vallow Daybell, who confirmed as of this morning she was not taking the stand herself, she got up afterwards for about 15 minutes, laying out exactly why it was self-defense. Again, she's on trial here for conspiring to kill her former husband, Charles Vallow, back in 2019 with her brother. So really bad set of circumstances here in this case. And in their closing arguments, both sides really laid out a different story. Take a listen.
Does the state want to blame someone for this tragic event? What evidence did the state show you in this trial that I wanted harm to come to my husband? We learned in this trial that I was praying for my husband. We learned in this trial that even though my husband and I were having marital issues, that we were both trying to do the best things for our son with special needs, JJ.
The execution of Charles Vallow is not a family tragedy. There is nothing that you can say about shooting a man as he lay on the ground that you can try to construe in any way to make that a family tragedy.
You know, something that stood out to me, Vallow Daybell, while she was making her closing arguments, again, a lot shorter than the state here, but the state still issued maybe 4 objections saying that she was trying to testify during her closings and that she was trying to introduce things that weren't introduced in evidence. So the judge had to stop her, ultimately sustaining those objections, which again is not something we see during opening or closing statements, but that happened in both during this case here. Again, Lori Vallow Daybell representing herself, so I think that does speak to why we're seeing some of those objections, but truly remarkable in court. It was a packed room today, and we're expecting more as we wait for the jury to come back tomorrow, and we'll see if possibly we have a verdict, which, you know, Tram, Rachel, I am expecting that we may tomorrow.
Right,
They'll
sure.
get a full day. They're going to sleep on it tonight, and then they have a full day to deliberate. And of course, it's up to them to go as long as they need, but that's my gut.
Okay, so Erica, you mentioned again the prosecution closing arguments. They went 90 versus Lori Vallow Daybell's 15 minutes. And then the prosecution went back up again for a second time in reaction to her closing arguments. You know, court ends at what, 4 o'clock? The judge did tell them that if the jury wants to go longer, they could have stayed longer. But obviously it seemed as though they had enough.
Yeah, that would be one interpretation of what happened because, you know, we don't know what the jury is thinking, but I did observe them as they were listening to that first portion of the state's closing argument. Again, it was more than 90 minutes. I talked with Hector Diaz, our legal expert with Diaz Law, and I said, what's the norm here? And, you know, usually it's 20 to 60 minutes, unless there's a lot of evidence in a case, which then maybe 90 minutes would be acceptable. But she went way beyond that to the point where the judge even said at one point, hey, you know, I need to give my court reporter a break here. Are you going to be done in about 5 minutes or so? Which I thought was not a good look for the state. But again, I think she was also trying to be very meticulous to lay out each bit of evidence that they presented in this case to stack up against Lori Vallow Daybell's no evidence that she presented in this case. Of course, she doesn't have to. The burden of proof is on the state. But I would imagine after hearing that late into the afternoon, hearing from Vallow Daybell and then hearing from the prosecutor again, of course, the jury has heard a lot today. And there's a lot to consider in this case, even though it was pretty straight and narrow on this one shooting of Charles Vallow.
Yeah, well, and the prosecutor very succinct on the rebuttal, regardless of the 90 minutes. So it'll be interesting to see what happens tomorrow morning. Erica, thank you so much for the hustle on today's coverage. We appreciate it.